Yes, I mean, if Craig knows that faith and theft are okay in the Bible.
He's a PhD in both philosophy and theology, and he will have a wonderful long explanation as to why you're wrong and you misunderstand the Bible.
So, Brian, my problem comes up when you're dealing with two different subjective frameworks and trying to decide if we're trying to establish an objective morality. And we have two societies with conflicting moralities. One that respects autonomy of individuals, right, because it's decided that autonomy is good, and another that says that cohesion of society is the ultimate good. And both of those will have the same evolutionary survival advantage that will be able to persist. One says that slavery is an absolute no-no. The other says slavery is really, really useful. Did you see my house? It's awesome.
Right.
So I guess my problem with this argument is that in trying to establish what the objective moral theory is here, that we can't use that argument because we're looking at two different and contradictory definitions of the good that are both equally useful from a societal standpoint.
Okay.
So I guess my question, I'm opening up this to the floor because I realize you've sort of been fielding all of the hard questions, but if we have a situation in which we have to deal with two equally valid definitions of the good, how can we say that there can be an objective moral standard? No, I think that the one that doesn't include slavery is much better. History would agree with me, but at the same time, I don't know why. I couldn't argue that from first principles.
Well, the relativists would argue, of course you think that, because you live in a society where that's against.
Exactly.
Does anyone, I mean, I'm happy to answer all the questions, but I mean, if we want to turn this more into a group discussion, it probably would be better if I didn't.
I guess Sam Harris has this new idea that he hasn't fully published yet because his book's not out, but sort of the moral landscape where there's peaks and valleys and there's maybe different places that are maximal good for that local area.
Okay.
And then there's places that are bad that we can tell are lower.
Essentially what he's arguing is there are two maximal.
Yeah. And so how do you judge between two equal maximas?
Yeah, and when they're totally contrary, because I saw his talk at TED, and it was really interesting until it got to the Q&A, and they said, okay, but isn't this just kind of a paternalistic argument of we've decided that these things are good and therefore they're good? And he says, look at these women, they look sad, therefore I'm right. And I was like, I totally agree with you, but you're wrong. Like, it's,
I would wonder if there are two demonstrably maximal good peaks, do we need to then choose one versus the other?
If one wants to enslave the other, yes.
Okay, good.
That's a fantastic argument, because what you could have is, like, for example, the different types of not that I'm a complete advocate of capitalism, but just so like you could have two different varieties of democratic capital countries.
Yep.
That it's not an issue of catastrophizing, and then so what you have to allow for in essence is plurality. It's the idea that's
that's kind of thing.
But if one society absolutely does not respect autonomy at all, slave trading is now on the table. That means...
Would those both be on the peaks, though? Because if we include not just utilitarian view, but also the justice view and all these other views you were talking about...
That's what I'm going to pull in
would they
to
be
actually
on the
say
peaks?
to solve this problem. I'm not going to appeal to autonomy, I'm going to appeal to Rawls. And what Rawls' idea is, he has this idea called the veil of ignorance, where if we're to decide moral laws for society, imagine for a situation, you don't know who you are in a society. You know what the demographic is precisely, you know your percentage chance of being where. And you say, well, we're going to institute a law that says it's okay for a person of type X, I don't know, black, let's say.
Just pulling one out of the hat, you know, like you do, yes.
Right? Well, you know what? Would I want to be that person in society? If I didn't know who I was going to be, would I want to be that person? And if your answer to that is no, then justice dictates you cannot support that law. Because now if you say, no, I wouldn't, but let's have the law anyway, you're advocating an unjust society. Because you're now advocating for a double standard.
What about people who see that and they are willing to accept that gamble?
Well, the question then isn't, well, they themselves may feel that it's an acceptable gamble given the peaks of the society. But the question becomes, because this is a judge for the society as a whole, you ask everybody in the society. Like, that's how the laws for the society as a whole should be judged, not on an individualistic basis. Because it's still essentially subjective. You're saying, well, what's your opinion? Right? Do you want to be this? Is democracy subjective? I would say democracy is objective because you talk to not everyone, but you poll a lot of people. And you now have an objective representation of the opinion of the population because of the representation. So likewise, you can say to everyone in society, who wants to be a slave? And if someone says, no, but sure, let's have this in there. Well, then wouldn't a more just version be to have, rather than picking people on the basis of ethnicity, let's have a lottery. Every year when someone's born, they get a number. And their number comes up, they're a slave. So now you don't get to remove yourself from this because of your ethnicity. Now you can't guarantee that your children will be slaves. Now do you agree to this or disagree to this? And if the answer is, well, the ethnic one's okay, but this gamble thing, then you want to go, well, you bigoted son of a bitch.
If you look at a society or a philosophy like Hinduism, where you have, or I should say, a very classical version of Hinduism, where you have a rigid caste society,
Sure.
I don't think there's anyone. This sort of smacks the no true Scotsman argument, but my understanding of the caste system is that there is an equal privilege and burden in all levels of all. So the Brahma caste, for example, the Brahmin caste is at the top. It's the priestly class, and they have the most privilege, but they also have the most obligation. And then the Harijan, the untouchables, they do literally the crap jobs, but they have the most level of personal freedom. Yeah, and everyone is pulling towards the same goal. Now, from my standpoint, I think it sucks that you can be born into servitude and that all your children forever and ever and ever and ever will be slaves. But if you were to poll society in this example, you would see that there are some people who say, yeah, it sucks for me in this life, but if I do a good job in the next life, I will come back as a higher caste or a lower caste. It doesn't matter because everyone's pulling towards the same communalist goal. So from that standpoint, you again have two different societies with different objective standards that are equally arguable. Of course, you'd have to demonstrate whether or not the reincarnation thing works. But if you're polling, if you're
objective, and you said reincarnation.
But if you're polling members of society to determine your objective standard, and they all believe in reincarnation, then that's like I'm not trying to.
So let me throw it.
Yeah.
We'll see if anyone else has something to say. So first of all, I'm going to say religion is not objective, so they don't have an objective standard for justice. Religion screws everything over. I completely agree. And second of all, I want to talk about you say the Brahmins have these maximum obligations and whatnot, and the guys at the bottom, well, their obligations are very different. And it seems to be, I'm going to say, your religious split here seems to be split along socioeconomic lines. And given that I don't accept your metaphysical view of the universe, please justify this socioeconomic split, this complete denial of the possibility of social mobility, because this religion thing is just nonsense. You can't prove it. What's your next argument?
Okay.
I think in the end too that I understand the thought experiment aspect of it, certainly. But I think there's some things that when you thought experiments are meant to operate within boundaries, and then what we may be doing is taking that boundary outside, and the answer is